The knock came just after sunset, 3 soft taps that felt unsure but urgent, and Claire Bennet almost ignored it because she had learned to protect her quiet evenings, yet something in the sound made her open the door, and there stood Ethan Miller, her neighbor's son, taller than she remembered, shoulders tense inside a faded gray hoodie, eyes carrying a weight that did not belong to someone his age. And for a second she saw both the boy who used to race his bike down Maple Street and the young man now standing alone on her porch. He apologized for coming without warning and said he just needed advice, nothing serious, but his voice cracked in a way that told her it was serious to him, so she stepped aside and let him in, telling herself this was what good neighbors did, and they sat at her kitchen table where the light was warm and steady, the kind of light that made hard conversations feel possible, and Ethan wrapped his hands around a mug of tea like he needed something solid to hold while he explained that his mother had taken a job in Seattle and left him behind to finish college, that the house felt too quiet, that every decision about his future suddenly felt heavier without someone in the next room. Claire listened without interrupting, noticing how he tried to sound calm and grown but kept glancing at the floor as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. And she recognized that look because she had worn it herself 3 years earlier when her marriage ended not with a fight but with silence, when her ex-husband Daniel packed slowly and left behind rooms that echoed, and as Ethan spoke about feeling stuck while his friends moved forward with jobs and plans and relationships, she felt a soft ache of understanding, yet she kept her tone steady and kind, telling him that being uncertain at 22 did not mean he was failing, that life rarely followed a straight line, that sometimes feeling lost simply meant he was about to grow. He listened closely. Really listened, as if her words mattered more than she realized, and when she asked what he truly wanted, not what sounded impressive, he hesitated before admitting he loved writing stories but felt foolish chasing something so uncertain, and Claire leaned forward, telling him dreams were not foolish, that practical paths could wait a little, that he deserved at least to try, and for the first time that evening he smiled, small but real, and the room felt lighter. They talked about classes, about internships, about how fear can disguise itself as responsibility, and time moved quickly, the sky outside turning dark blue while the kitchen clock ticked unnoticed, and Claire forgot that she had once promised herself not to get too involved in other people's lives because involvement meant risk, yet there was something about Ethan's honesty that made her drop her guard, perhaps because he did not come with expectations, only questions. When he finally stood to leave, he paused by the door and thanked her in a way that felt deeper than politeness, saying she had a way of making things less heavy, and she laughed softly, brushing it aside, telling him that was what neighbors were for. But as she closed the door and watched him walk back across the lawn under the streetlight's pale glow, she felt a strange pull in her chest, not dramatic, not reckless, just a quiet awareness that something had shifted. That this was not just a quick favor or a casual chat, and she tried to name the feeling but could not, so she returned to her kitchen and washed the untouched dishes slowly, replaying his words in her mind, noticing how he had looked at her not just for advice but for reassurance, as if her presence alone steadied him. She told herself it was natural to want to help, that she was older and had experience and a calm voice, that he simply needed guidance during a hard transition. Yet as she sat down later with her book, she found she had read the same page 3 times without understanding it because her thoughts kept drifting back to the way his shoulders had relaxed as they talked, the way his smile had grown when she encouraged his writing, and she wondered when she had last made someone feel that scene. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, porch lights flickering off one by one, and Claire realized that for the first time in months, her house did not feel empty but thoughtful, as if the walls had absorbed conversation instead of silence, and she tried to shake off the warmth spreading through her because it felt too close to something she had carefully avoided since her divorce, something like connection, something like being needed, and she reminded herself that Ethan was young, that he was finding his path, that she was simply offering support. Yet even as she turned off the lights and headed upstairs, she knew the evening had planted something small and unexpected in her heart, not romance, not yet, but a spark of meaning that made the ordinary feel different. Meanwhile, across the lawn, Ethan stood in his dark living room for a moment. Before switching on the lamp, thinking about how easily she had understood him, how her words felt steady instead of rushed, and he realized that knocking on her door had taken courage he did not know he had, and that her kindness had given him more than advice, it had given him clarity. And as Claire lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic, she could not stop hearing his quiet gratitude, could not ignore the subtle shift in her own heartbeat when she remembered his steady gaze, and though she insisted to herself that it was just neighborly concern, just a simple act of support, deep down she sensed that this was the start of something that would not fade as quickly as the evening light, something that would return with the next knock on her door. Something that would ask more from both of them than either expected. The visits became natural after that first night, almost routine, yet each one carried a quiet charge that neither Claire nor Ethan named, and what began as simple questions about resumes and graduate programs slowly turned into longer talks about fear, purpose, and the strange pressure of becoming an adult too quickly. Ethan would text before coming over, polite and careful, and Claire would find herself checking the clock, smoothing her hair, telling herself it was only courtesy, nothing more, but her pulse would still lift when the doorbell rang. And once he stepped inside, the house no longer felt like a place she was surviving in but living in, filled with conversation and warmth. They would sit at the kitchen table or move to the living room couch with notebooks open, discussing cover letters and personal statements. Yet somehow the talk always drifted into deeper water, into stories about childhood memories, about mistakes that shaped them, about the quiet disappointment Ethan felt when comparing himself to friends who already seemed successful, and Claire would answer honestly, sharing how her marriage had ended not in drama but distance, how loneliness can grow slowly until it feels normal, and Ethan listened with focus that surprised her, not with pity but respect. As if her past made her stronger in his eyes. One rainy afternoon when thunder rolled low over the neighborhood and power flickered out across Maple Street, Ethan showed up holding a flashlight and a small bag of takeout, smiling in a way that felt both shy and intentional, saying he figured she might not want to sit in the dark alone, and Claire laughed, letting him in without hesitation, candles soon glowing around the room, shadows soft against the walls, the storm outside creating a small world inside where time felt suspended, and they ate on the coffee table, talking about books he loved, about the novel he secretly wanted to write but felt embarrassed admitting to others, and Claire encouraged him without hesitation, telling him that safe dreams often become regrets, that courage sometimes looks quiet. At first, the rain hit the windows harder, and Ethan's voice grew softer as he said he never felt judged in her house, that she never rushed him, and when he looked at her, there was admiration in his eyes that went beyond gratitude, something steady and warm that made her breath catch before she forced herself to look away, reminding herself of the years between them, of the roles they played as neighbors, of the careful lines adults are meant to respect. Yet the more she tried to focus on boundaries, the more she noticed the small details, the way he remembered how she liked her tea, the way he asked about her day before speaking about himself, the way his laughter filled the empty corners of the room that had once echoed after her divorce, and she began to realize that his presence was not just helpful for him but healing for her, that the silence she had grown used to was slowly being replaced by anticipation. Days turned into weeks, and their talks moved from structured advice to shared moments, short walks in the evening air, quick stops at the local coffee shop where neighbors greeted them with easy smiles, assuming they were simply family friends, and Claire never corrected anyone because there was nothing to correct, at least not officially, yet she felt a flicker of awareness each time someone's eyes lingered too long, as if sensing something neither of them had spoken aloud. One night as he prepared to leave, standing close to the doorway while cool autumn air slipped inside, Ethan hesitated and said her name without the formal Ms. Bennett he once used, just Claire, simple and direct, and that small change carried more meaning than a grand confession, because it showed comfort, closeness, a shift from polite distance to personal connection, and she felt it in the quiet pause that followed, in the way neither stepped back immediately. He told her she made him feel understood, that talking to her gave him confidence he couldn't find anywhere else, and Claire smiled gently, but her heart beat louder than she expected, because being needed again felt powerful and dangerous at the same time. And after he left, she stood by the window watching him cross the lawn under the streetlights, her reflection faint in the glass, wondering when her role had changed from helpful neighbor to something more complicated. She tried to set limits the next week, replying to messages slower, suggesting he meet classmates to discuss his plans, encouraging independence, yet each time she pulled back, he sensed it, asking if she was busy, if he had done something wrong, and his concern softened her resolve because she knew what it felt like to fear losing connection. Meanwhile, Ethan grew more confident, submitting applications, sharing essays he had written late at night, trusting her opinion above anyone else's, and with every page he handed her, there was vulnerability wrapped in hope, and Claire admired his bravery, the way he dared to dream even while doubting himself. During one quiet evening conversation, he admitted that sometimes he imagined a future where he felt steady and sure of himself, and when she asked what that looked like, he said it felt a lot like sitting across from her at the kitchen table, calm and focused, and the simplicity of that answer unsettled her because it revealed how deeply she had become part of his vision of stability. She knew feelings can grow unnoticed, fed by shared time and honest words, and as much as she valued the connection, she understood that affection born in vulnerability can blur lines quickly. Yet instead of stepping away completely, she allowed the closeness to continue, telling herself it was harmless, that kindness does not equal romance, that admiration does not equal love. But late at night, when she lay in bed replaying conversations, she could not deny that her own loneliness had begun to soften in his presence, that the warmth she felt when he smiled was no longer purely protective, and somewhere between resume edits and stormy evenings, between practical advice and shared laughter, the space between them shifted quietly from mentorship to something unspoken, something delicate and bright, like a spark waiting for air, and though neither named it, both felt it growing stronger with every knock on her door. By the time autumn settled fully over the neighborhood, the change between Claire and Ethan was impossible to ignore, though neither of them said it out loud, and what once felt like harmless support now carried quiet tension in every glance and pause. Ethan had grown more confident in small ways. He spoke about internships with hope instead of doubt. He shared new pages of his novel idea without apologizing first, and he laughed more freely, but with that confidence came honesty that edged closer to something personal, something that made Claire's chest tighten whenever he looked at her a second too long. One Saturday he suggested they visit the community art fair downtown, saying he needed fresh air after weeks of applications, and Claire agreed too quickly, telling herself it was just a neighborly outing, yet she took extra care getting ready, choosing a simple blue sweater and brushing her hair with unusual attention. And when Ethan picked her up in his old sedan, smiling in a way that felt proud and nervous at once, she felt a flicker of awareness that this was no longer just guidance, it felt like a moment. The fair buzzed with music and conversation, couples walking hand in hand, families carrying coffee cups, artists calling out friendly greetings, and as Claire and Ethan moved through the crowd, they fell into step naturally, their shoulders brushing now and then, neither stepping away, and strangers glanced at them with easy assumptions that they belonged together, and Claire noticed but stayed silent, unsure whether correcting them would create distance she was not ready to face. Ethan seemed lighter that day, pointing out paintings he loved, teasing her gently about her serious expression when she studied a sculpture too long, and when they stopped at a booth offering quick portrait sketches, he surprised her by saying they should get one, just for fun. And though she hesitated, aware of the symbolism, she agreed, sitting beside him while the artist's pencil moved swiftly across paper, capturing their profiles turned slightly toward each other. And as they waited, Claire became deeply aware of how close they were, how easy it felt to exist side by side without effort. And when the artist handed them the finished sketch, Ethan's expression softened as if he were looking at more than ink on paper. Later, They walked to the river, where sunset painted the sky in gold and pink, and the world seemed quieter there, distant from expectations, and Ethan's voice grew serious as he admitted that before knocking on her door weeks ago, he had felt invisible, unsure of his place in anything, but now he felt seen, stronger, and Claire felt both pride and fear hearing that because she knew influence carries responsibility, and she never wanted to shape his life in a way that limited it. He turned to her and said he didn't care if things felt complicated, that some connections mattered more than easy answers, and Claire's heart pounded at the honesty in his tone, at the way he spoke not with youthful impulse but with calm conviction, yet she also felt the weight of reality pressing in, the years between them, the neighbors who might whisper, the fragile balance between admiration and attachment, and she understood that emotions born from comfort can grow fast if not guided carefully. She told him gently that life was long, that feelings can change as quickly as seasons, and he listened without arguing, but his eyes did not waver, and in that steady gaze she saw not a boy searching for direction but a man aware of what he felt, and that recognition unsettled her more than anything else because it meant the shift was mutual. As twilight deepened, silence stretched between them, not awkward but charged, and Claire sensed that if she allowed one more step forward, the line between neighbor and something deeper would blur beyond repair. Yet part of her, the lonely part that had grown quiet after her divorce, felt alive in his presence, awake in a way she had not expected to feel again. When they finally returned home, the streetlights glowing softly, Ethan walked her to her door and paused, as if measuring his words carefully, and he admitted he didn't want to lose what they had, that her presence had become important to him in ways he couldn't fully explain. And Claire felt tears threaten behind her steady expression because she knew that protecting him might mean stepping back even if it hurt. She thanked him for the day, for his honesty, and went inside with the small portrait clutched gently in her hand, closing the door slowly as if the moment might shatter with sudden movement. And once alone she leaned against the wood, heart racing, realizing that what she thought was simple kindness had grown into something delicate and powerful. Upstairs, she placed the sketch on her dresser and studied it under the soft lamplight, noticing how the artist had drawn them angled toward each other, expressions calm and connected, as if belonging in the same frame, and the image made her both smile and ache because it reflected a possibility she wasn't sure she could allow. Meanwhile Ethan stood on his porch across the lawn, looking back at her house with quiet determination, understanding that his feelings were no longer confusion but clarity, and that whatever happened next would require courage from both of them. Inside her bedroom, Claire lay awake, replaying the river's glow, his steady voice, the way the evening had felt simple and meaningful at once, and she knew the coming days would demand a decision, either step back and guard their futures carefully or risk stepping forward into uncertain territory. And as she stared at the ceiling listening to the distant hum of traffic, she understood one truth clearly: what started as help had become something the heart does not expect, and no matter what she chose next, nothing between them would ever return to what it once was. Claire made the decision on a quiet Monday morning when the house felt too still and the portrait from the art fair caught her eye from the dresser, reminding her how easily emotions can grow when fed by warmth and time, and she understood with sudden clarity that caring for Ethan also meant protecting his future. So she began creating distance in small but firm ways, replying to his messages with kindness yet less frequency, encouraging him to meet classmates for coffee instead of coming over, suggesting he focus on interviews and applications without leaning on her reassurance. And though each step felt like pulling a thread from her own heart, she stayed steady because she knew blurred lines can turn even beautiful feelings into regret. Ethan noticed within days, his texts shifting from casual to concerned, asking if she was busy, if he had said something wrong, and she answered honestly but briefly, telling him he had done nothing wrong, that she simply believed he needed space to grow without depending on her presence. Yet the words felt heavier than she expected, as if they carried more meaning than explanation. One evening he appeared at her door again, not hesitant like the first time but calm and resolved, and when she opened it she saw both strength and vulnerability in his eyes, and before she could speak he asked quietly if she was stepping away because she was afraid, and the question pierced her defenses because it held truth. Yet she invited him inside, knowing they deserved clarity instead of confusion. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table where everything had started, and Claire spoke carefully, explaining that connection can be powerful but timing matters, that he was at the beginning of his life while she had already lived through chapters that shaped her differently, that she did not want to become the reason he limited his world. And Ethan listened without interrupting, hands folded tightly as if holding his emotions in place. When he finally responded, his voice was steady, saying she had not limited him but strengthened him, that her belief in his writing had given him courage he didn't know he had, and that whatever he felt was not confusion but respect and affection. Yet he also admitted he understood her concern, that he did not want to build something that might later cause regret, and in that moment Claire saw how much he had grown since the first knock on her door. Tears filled her eyes though she kept her posture firm, telling him that sometimes love shows itself by stepping back, by choosing what protects both people instead of what feels good in the moment, and the word love hung softly between them, not dramatic or reckless but sincere and gentle, and Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it, then surprised her by thanking her, not for ending something but for teaching him what healthy care looks like. He said she had shown him that love does not have to be loud to matter, that steady kindness can change a life quietly, and those words settled deep in her heart because they reflected everything she hoped he would learn, and after a long pause he stood, not with anger but acceptance, promising he would keep writing, promising he would chase opportunities beyond Maple Street, and before leaving he told her he hoped she would chase her own dream too, the bookstore cafe she once mentioned during a stormy night, and that she deserved a future that felt as alive as the advice she gave. When the door closed behind him, silence returned, but it no longer felt empty, it felt meaningful, as if something important had passed through the house and left it stronger. Weeks moved quickly after that conversation, Ethan receiving an internship offer in Chicago that aligned with his writing goals, and though Claire heard the news from his mother instead of him directly, she felt pride instead of pain, understanding that distance had allowed him to step fully into his path. And on the morning he left, she watched from her window as his car disappeared down the street, whispering a quiet wish for his happiness. Life settled again, yet Claire found herself reflecting not on what ended but on what began inside her during those months, realizing she had allowed fear to freeze her own dreams for too long, and inspired by his courage, she enrolled in a small business class at the community center, sketching plans for a cozy bookstore cafe filled with soft chairs and local art, imagining shelves lined with stories that once felt impossible, and with each step she felt the echo of his belief pushing her forward. Sometimes in the evening she would hold the portrait from the fair and smile gently, not with longing but gratitude, understanding that some relationships are meant to awaken rather than remain, to teach rather than stay, and though she missed the sound of his knock, she no longer questioned her choice because it came from respect and care. Months later a letter arrived from Chicago, handwritten and simple, describing his first published short story and the city skyline outside his apartment window, thanking her again for listening when he felt lost, and Claire read it twice, heart steady, realizing that their connection had transformed into something lasting without crossing lines that would have complicated their futures. She placed the letter beside her business plans and felt a calm confidence she had not known in years, understanding that the most meaningful love stories are not always about holding on but about knowing when to let go with grace. And as she locked up the community center one evening after class, the cool air brushing her face, she sensed that both of them were exactly where they needed to be, shaped by a season of quiet affection that remained pure because they chose wisdom over impulse. And though the neighborhood returned to its ordinary rhythm, the words he spoke that night stayed with her, reminding her that love, when guided by maturity and respect, can change two lives without ever needing to claim more than it should.